أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الخوي الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل، نعم المولى ونعم النصير. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الذي ذكره شرف للذاكرين وشكره فوز للشاكرين وطاعته نجاة للمطيعين وحمده عز للحامدين. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين وحبيب إله العالمين، سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا، الرسول الأمجد المحمود الأحمد، رحمة للعالمين، أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. وعلى تمام عدة المرسلين وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين وأصحابه المنتجبين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا ومولانا وإمام زماننا الحجة المنتظر المهدي، عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم وقرآنه المجيد وقوله الحق: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولقد ذرأنا لجهنم كثيرا من الجن والإنس، لهم قلوب لا يفقهون بها ولهم أعين لا يبصرون بها ولهم آذان لا يسمعون بها، أولئك كالأنعام بل هم أضل، أولئك هم الغافلون. آمنا بالله وصدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected Sheikh, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal, when He begins from Surah Al-Fatiha unto Surah Al-Baqarah, He begins in a very interesting way. He says, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. This book is a guide for those who are muttaqeen. Then Allah, He starts with one characteristic of the muttaqeen, which is very interesting. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, those who believe in the unseen. It is very interesting that Allah Azza wa Jal, when He wanted to describe the muttaqeen, the first thing He describes them with is the belief in the unseen. And truly today, when you go to the Western society, you can see why Allah Azza wa Jal chose this as the first defining characteristic of somebody who has piety or somebody who is conscious of Allah. Because indeed Allah Azza wa Jal Himself is unseen to us. He is not somebody we can see physically. He is not somebody we can understand with our mental minds. He is not somebody that can be captured through the physical existence. But on top of that, many of our core beliefs are unseen. In Dua al-Adila, for example, we say, أشهد أن الموت حق والجنة والنار حق والساعة آتية لا ريب فيها. We bear witness that death is truth. Now, death in itself is not unseen, but what happens after death is unseen. The malaika, they are unseen. Jannah, Jahannam are unseen. The hour of resurrection, the day of judgment is unseen. And therefore, it is this defining factor that takes us out of disbelief into belief. The ability to understand and recognize that there is a world beyond this physical world. And one of the most important things we believe in, and so one of the most important things every religion believes in, is the idea of something called the soul. The idea that we as human beings are also not limited to this physical existence. Rather, we as human beings have two parts to our existence: the body and the soul. When you go to Western thought, when you go to Western philosophy and science, you see that this idea of the soul is not just questioned but rejected nowadays. Most contemporary philosophers, especially atheist philosophers and scientists, reject the idea of the soul because for them the soul is something that cannot be seen by experiments. In the scientific world, everything that is agreed upon is something that comes from experiments. I have to be able to find the soul in an experiment. I have to be able to weigh the soul in an experiment. I have to be able to see the soul in an experiment. They say, where's the evidence for the soul? We as human beings, we are one being and we can see everything that works in the way it works in its physiological and chemical way. There is no reason to believe in a soul if I am an atheist or a scientist. And therefore you find most of the world that we live in today, they disagree with the soul. Even if they don't disagree in the soul, their belief in the soul has diminished. That's why when you go to their lectures or you go to their studies, you think about what is the conscience. They'll say it's part of the brain, and in fact comes from our genetic makeup. They believe in natural selection. Our conscience, our moral compass comes from the way we were born and the environments we grow up in. Otherwise, it's just something that's made up. There's no such thing as everyone having a conscience that tells them to one right and one wrong. No. They don't believe in the soul and the fact that we have something inside us that we define as us. This is something you find has affected Western philosophers who were also religious. The likes of the man John Hick. John Hick is a Christian theologian. I believe he either passed away recently or he's still alive, but he's very elderly. He rejected the idea of the soul. He said, go to scientific experiments, go to neuroscience. You will see they have discovered so many things that come from the brain. He said in the future it is possible all of the things that we plug the gap with the soul, we will be able to understand how the brain makes these things happen. He says therefore there's no need for us to create this soul and to pretend that there is a soul. A Christian theologian, the Bible and all of the scripture inside Christian theology talks about the soul, talks about spirituality, talks about connecting to God, talks about the world of the souls, how we are created as a soul, how there is purgatory and the souls will be judged. Yet John Hick says no, all of this is metaphorical. All of this is symbolic. Because this is how they have to answer to the atheist. When they want to fit in with the atheist and bring the science in there, they fit in like this. They say no, there's no such thing as the soul. You go further in atheist theology and you find people like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens. They write books such as God is Not Great. They also rubbish the idea of the soul. They don't reject it. They rubbish it. They say, where is your evidence? This is something that was made up by cavemen, and today we take it along in our religion. This is nothing real. There's no such thing as the soul. We are all the body. Now, if I had a few more days, we would go into what implications this have. Because if I am not a soul and I am only a body, my decisions come from my body. My free will comes from my body. If you change my chemical makeup, you can change the way I make decisions. If you change the environment I grow up in, you can change what I believe to be right and wrong. And this is what they try to do as well. In the media, they try to put subliminal messages in there because they believe they can change your makeup. Such that one psychologist famously said, give me a child from the age of 0 and I will make him whatever you ask me to make him. Give me a child from the age of 0. He's just born. Give him to me. Tell me what you want him to become. I will make him that. I will completely change his makeup. I will make his environment such and I will make him believe whatever I want him to believe. Because he is simply a product of biology and chemistry. He has chemical impulses, he does this. If I change the way he thinks, he'll do this. However, even when you go to science, there are many questions that are left unanswered. For example, dreams. Dreams in science have still not properly been understood. Why is it that we have certain dreams? Now, some dreams you can understand. We have 10 things on our mind we were thinking about in the day. Then at night time you go to bed and you have a dream and all 10 things come into one magical story that's really confused and you wake up with a nightmare. That is understood. However, there are many dreams we can't understand. There are many people that have problems when they sleep. They see dreams that are very graphic. Dreams that look very real. Dreams that to you seem very surreal. Or dreams that bring you to a place that you think you've been to before. But you can't explain why. Science has not been able to sufficiently understand this. Number 2, we find, for example, the placebo effect. In medical studies, there's something called the placebo effect. They create a new medicinal intervention. They then put a study where they give some people the new medicine and some people a fake medicine. There are a number of studies where the fake medicine outdoes the real medicine. Why? The placebo effect. The fact that an individual believes that this fake pill works makes it work. How does science explain that? They still haven't found a sufficient explanation. The very fact that I believe a pill will work makes it work, even if it's just fake. It's just an empty pill. I remember there was one study where they gave them organic or some biotic yogurt and they gave fake yogurt. The fake yogurt outdid the biotic yogurt. Just because people believe that the fake yogurt was real. Our minds can change the way we think. And so you find many religious philosophers come and say, if we're atheists, this life doesn't mean anything. Clearly they are deluded, and there is more to this life than just the body. There is what we call the soul, or the metaphysical world. This idea of the soul I find best understood in the Western society by a man by the name of Plato. All of you have heard of the famous Greek philosopher Plato. His idea is strangely Islamic, even though he lived before Islam. But he has a beautiful way of explaining the body and soul cohesion. Before him, actually, let's mention René Descartes. René Descartes lived in the period of Enlightenment. He came out with a famous understanding of the soul. He said all of these people in the Enlightenment period are coming out and saying we are only a body. He thought about this. And he said, but wait, there's something more to my existence than my body. He said, if you cut my arm off, I won't feel any less of a human being than I did before. If you cut my leg off, I won't suddenly think I'm a different person. If you were to cut all of my limbs off and hang me in thin air, I would still believe I'm the same individual I am before. He then came out with the famous statements, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And he said there's something about me beyond my physical makeup that makes me believe that I am me. And he says this must be what we call the soul. Plato, in a beautiful analogy, he talks about the soul and he says that human beings are made up in an interesting way. He says we are like a charioteer. We are like a horse rider. And we have two horses within our existence, within our makeup. He says we have one horse which is a divine horse. A horse that takes us towards virtue. A horse that takes us towards what is called the divine ideas, divine philosophy. The ideas of goodness. There's one horse that takes us towards that way. There is another horse that is steeped in desires. There is another horse that is hungry, that wants to be satiated. He says at the helm of this horse we have what we call the intellect. And the intellect must control both of these horses and keep them in line with each other. If the intellect veers towards the divine and foregoes the desire, that horse will be imbalanced and will crash. If the intellect veers towards the desire but forgets the divine, it will similarly be imbalanced and crash. This is exactly how Islam describes the spiritual makeup of an individual. In Islam, the soul is so important that we as human beings are valueless without the soul. We as human beings are valueless without the soul. It is narrated in Hayatul Qulub that when Allah created Adam alayhi salam, He created him 2,000 years before the story you read in the Quran. You know, you read in the Quran where Allah tells the Malaika, I'm going to create a man and put him upon the earth. This story is 2,000 years after Allah created Adam. Allah created Adam and He put the body of Adam on the door of Jannah. The Malaika would look at it and wonder, what is this body? Why has Allah created this body? Then the Quranic story comes and what happens? Allah says, فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ, when I've completed its formation, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَكَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. When I have breathed into it of my ruh, then you go down to it in prostration. Meaning the body without the ruh was not worth prostration of the angels. When the body gained the ruh, when the body gained the soul, that is when it became worthy of the prostration of the angels. So in Islam, the soul came first. The soul was more important than the body. The body was a vehicle that was to be used by the soul. And in the spiritual makeup of man, we find that Allah has granted us what we call an aql, an intellect. Now aql in Arabic comes from the root word which means to restrain a horse. What was Plato's analogy? The horse rider. In Arabic, an aql is that which is used to restrain a horse. And Allah gave us the intellect, the aql, in order to restrain the individual so that we could use our faculties in the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We find the spiritual philosophers, the likes of Fadlallah Hyderi in more contemporary times, he says that the human being is made up of three. We have what we call the jism, the body. We have a nafs, and specifically we will call the nafs al-ammara, the nafs that commands us towards base desires, the animalistic self, the ego, the psyche. And we have what we call the ruh, which is the divine aspect of the human being. That aspect of the human being that connects us towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Islam, our aql is meant to restrain both of these and use both of these in unison. Such that we find at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, some wives of some companions came to him in a disheveled state. Rasulullah said, what is the matter with you? Why do you look like this? Why don't you cover yourself up and look, presentable? They said, Ya Rasulullah, we've come to complain to you about our husbands. He said, what's wrong? What's happened? They said, we have no reason to look good and we have no reason to keep ourselves presentable. For our husbands pray all night long and fast all day long, and they never present themselves before us. The hadith says Rasulullah, he left the masjid, or he left his house without even taking his slippers on. He left immediately to go to the house of these companions. And he went to the companions and he said to them, is what your wife's saying true? They said, yes, Ya Rasulullah, we saw you worshipping so much, we wanted to emulate what you do. Rasulullah said, oh Uthman, it's Uthman ibn Mad'un, a different Uthman. He said, oh Uthman, I am Rasulullah. No one can pray like I pray. No one can fast like I fast. But yet I use perfume, I eat meat, and I enjoy relations with my wife. So understand that life is a life of moderation. People that had become hermits, people that had gone too much towards the divine horse, they had foregone their desires completely. Rasulullah said, this is not Islam. This is imbalanced. This is not what we teach. We teach the balanced form of Islam. The opposite, those who go towards their desires, we know very well. Those who engage and indulge in their desires. Those who don't have a balance when it comes to their desires. We know about these people. Such that Imam al-Qadhim salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, he describes the pleasures of this world and he says the pleasures of this world are like seawater. The more you drink, the more you need to drink more, until eventually it kills you. Pleasures are like this. If we are to only veer towards the horse which is of desires, it will lead us astray and towards death. Because these desires can never be satiated. That nafs al-ammara, that nafs which commands us towards base desires, it wants us only to fulfill desires. And it commands us, it demands from us. And it will keep demanding from us. Because we can never satiate those desires. Therefore, Allah wanted us to be moderate human beings. Where our aql, which is the repository of knowledge and wisdom. Now understand that the idea or the philosophy of knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge and wisdom is not there for you to store it in your mind but never use it. Knowledge and wisdom is there for you to go towards perfection. So you understood how to attain balance in life and live as a perfect human being. When we think of aql in our societies, because of the way we say it in Urdu and Gujarati, aql to us is that which gives us knowledge and logic and common sense. That's true. In the hadith it says this as well. But that knowledge, that common sense and that wisdom is there for us to use it, not to store it like a computer. There are many people, they have knowledge, they store it up there, they don't practice any of it. What use is that? That is not ilm. A computer can do the same thing, it can do it better than us. Somebody with ilm is somebody who uses his knowledge to perfect himself and find the balance in life. How to make sure he is able to engage both the divine aspect of himself and the desire aspect of himself. Now that we've understood this preliminary discussion, the idea of the self and how there are three parts to our existence. The jasad, the body, which is the vehicle of our existence. The ruh, the divine aspect of our existence. And the nafs, the ego or the base self of our existence. Now we understand this, let's move towards the crux of the discussion tonight. The crux of my discussion was the idea of what happens after death. Or the idea of death itself. In Western circles, it's interesting. When they study the soul, they study it alongside the idea of an afterlife. Because if we believe in a soul, automatically we have to believe in something after death. But if we reject the soul, then everything is the body. Then my life is this body, and my death is the death of the body. When I die, nothing happens after death. And that is what the atheist believes. The atheist believes that you have this one chance to live life, you should enjoy it, live it to its maximum, and when you die, that's it, that's the end of life. We then question, what's the point of life? If the end of my life is nothing, what is really the point? And you'll never really find a beautiful answer from this from an atheist. They'll say all sorts of things. But they believe the end of life is the end of your body. As soon as you add the soul into the equation, the question comes, my body dies, what happens to my soul after death? And so here today I'd like to explain the two types of death or three types of death that we find within Islamic literature. Because we find in Islamic literature we are not just confined to one form of death and what happens after it. Rather there is another form of death that we ought to be wary of. If I have your permission, please recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The first type of death in Islamic literature is the death that we all know about. The death that everyone is sure about. The death that they're commemorating right now, which is the death of the body. The idea that one day this body will expire and I will have to go into a new world. Remembering this type of death is extremely beneficial for the believers. Such that we find a number of hadiths from Rasulullah talking about the remembrance of death. Why? Why is it so important to remember this death, to interact with this death, to engage with this death? Because understanding this death allows you to live a more holistic life. You know, Amirul Mu'mineen in Nahj al-Balagha, I believe Sermon 109, he beautifully explains the passage of death and what happens after it. He says that at the time when death starts to come over an individual, he starts to undergo what we call sakarat. In Surah Al-Qaf, Allah says, وَجَاءَتْ سَكْرَةُ الْمَوْتِ بِالْحَقِّ. The intoxication of death will come with truth. What is this intoxication of death? Amir al-Mu'mineen explains. He says when death comes to you, the first thing that starts to happen is your complexion starts to change and the extremities of your limbs start to become languid. They start to lose sensation. Slowly but surely the extremities of your limbs become very weak and your complexion starts to become lighter. He says slowly this happens until you lose the faculty of speech. He says at this time you will see your respected family members around you. They will be talking to you. They will be trying to engage with you. And you will hear everything that they say with full intelligence. But you won't be able to respond to a word that they say. Amir al-Mu'mineen says at this time, a man will start to think about the time that he spent in this world. And whether he spent it fruitfully or whether he wasted it. And then at this time, the man will start to think about how he amassed wealth in this world, how he ran after wealth in this world, and whether he spent it in the right way or not. It is at this time when he loses his faculty of speech, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, he will start to think about all the wealth that he amassed and how it will not follow him to his grave. All that wealth that he amassed and did not spend in charity, now it will go to his family members. And he will regret how he spent his time in this world. Amir al-Mu'mineen carries on. He says, after having lost the faculty of speech, then will go to faculty of his ears. Then he will see his family members talking to him. He will see their mouths moving, but he will not hear anything coming out of their mouths. He will be looking around, seeing people waving at him, seeing people talking to him, but he can no longer hear them, nor can he speak to them anymore. At this point in time, he will know that his death is very close. And he will start to regret over his time more and more. Because now he recognizes his time has come to go away from this world. Then Amir al-Mu'mineen says slowly but surely his faculties will start to diminish. Until his spirit is taken out of his body. And he leaves this world. At this time, his family members will feel loneliness from him. They'll feel lonely. You know, if you're in the room with a dead body, even though there's many of you there, you'll feel a sense of loneliness. There will be this sense of, fear, this sense of scared. Because that loneliness from the dead body emanates onto you. Because that individual now feels lonely. But you feel lonely because of it. You can feel its loneliness. That is what happens at the time of death. We are told in Manazil al-Akhirah and another tradition recorded by Shaykh Abbas al-Qummi, he says at this time when the spirit is taken out of the body really struggles because it feels like the entirety of its skin is being pulled from all sides. In another tradition of Rasulullah, what does he say? He says that by Allah, looking at the angel of death at times can be worse than being struck by the sword 1,000 times. That is how difficult death is for the believer. And this is why the Ahlul Bayt say, remember this death, prepare for this death. Remember the time, Imam al-Hadi salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, in a beautiful tradition found in Mizan al-Hikmah, or the Scales of Wisdom, he says, remember your death in front of your family members, because that will be a time when your family will not benefit you, and you will have nobody to aid you at that time. It's an interesting tradition. Because he says, remember your death in front of your family members. Meaning you and your family ought to discuss the idea of death. You ought to discuss what will happen at that time. You ought to discuss what you want to be done at that time. Don't just think about it for yourselves. Don't just contemplate on death. No, speak to your family about your death. Remember death with your family, so that none of you are scared of death when death comes to you. So that all of you are prepared for what should happen at that time. Why is remembering death so important? In a hadith from Rasulullah, he explains it beautifully. He says, by frequently remembering death, أحيا الله قلبه. Allah gives life to your heart. Allah gives life to your heart. What sort of life is this? I thought I'm already alive. In the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jalla in Surah 8, Surah Al-Anfal, verse number 24, he says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اسْتَجِيبُوا لِلَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ إِذَا دَعَاكُمْ لِمَا يُحْيِيكُمْ. O you who believe, answer the call of Allah and His Messenger when they call you to that which gives you life. I thought I'm already alive. No, you are alive as a body, but they're calling you to the life of your soul. This is where we find Amirul Mu'mineen salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. He says, Al-Jahl or Al-Jahala mumitul ahya. Ignorance is the death of the man who is alive. The man who is ignorant of his soul. The man who is ignorant of that spiritual aspect of him. This is an individual who is a dead man walking upon the earth. Remembering death gives you life. Why? Because it reminds you that your life is not just the life of your body, but the life of your soul. Allah in the Quran, many times He talks about these people who are spiritually dead. In fact, Surah Al-Baqarah, the first few verses He talks about it. Verse number 6. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَأَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Those who disbelieve, surely those who disbelieve, it makes no difference whether you warn them or do not warn them. They will not believe. ختم الله على قلوبهم وعلى سمعهم وعلى أبصارهم غشاوة وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. Allah says Allah has set a seal upon their hearts and a seal upon their ears, on their hearing. And there is a veil over their eyes. In the verse I recited at the beginning in my khutbah, Surah 7 verse 179, Allah says what? وَلَقَدْ ذَرَأْنَا لِجَهَنَّمَ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ. We have prepared Jahannam for many of the jinn and the men. لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. They have hearts, they can't understand with it. وَلَهُمْ أَعْيُنٌ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ بِهَا. They have eyes, they can't see with them. وَلَهُمْ آذَانٌ لَا يَسْمَعُونَ بِهَا. They have ears, they can't hear with them. These are people spiritually, they are dead. This is extremely important for us to remember at this time. Why? Because on Ashura, Abi Abdullah al-Husayn, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, he was up against people that spiritually they were dead. And this is something I think we lose the appreciation for, because we remember it every year, we say it in passing, but it's something extremely important to remember. The individuals against Abi Abdullah al-Husayn, they are not people who disbelieve on the tongue. They are not people who actively are kafir. They do not claim not to follow Islam. They are Muslims. They pray, they fast, they recite Quran. They are Muslims. But there's something about them that means they are dead. You know, this comes to light on the day of Ashura when Imam al-Husayn is giving a sermon. Now you think about this and just ponder on this for a second. In every adhan you recite Ashhadu anna Muhammadun Rasulullah. In every tashahhud you say Ashhadu anna Muhammadun Rasulullah. Or even in their school, they don't say that, but they say At-Tahiyyatu lil-Rasul. They give blessings upon the Prophet in their tashahhud. So in every salat, you acknowledge the Prophet. Your deen, your religion is complete with the shahadatain, with bearing witness to the Prophet. You know, Yazid, when he wants us to silence Imam al-Sajjad, he gets them to recite adhan where they bear witness to Rasulullah. These are people who acknowledge Rasulullah. It's not like years have passed. 50 years have passed since Rasulullah. Those individuals in Karbala, they have either seen the prophets or they are children of people who lived alongside the Prophet. It's not like years have gone by, they've never seen the Prophet's a mythological character to them. No, they are close to the time of the Prophet. They are second, third generation Muslims. Their fathers have seen Rasulullah. The elderly companions on that day have seen Rasulullah. Imam al-Hussein stands in front of them. He says to them, am I not the son of the daughter of your prophet? He doesn't say, am I not the son of Rasulullah? He says, am I not the son of your prophet? Is my uncle not Hamza Sayyid al-Shuhada? Is my uncle not Hamza, the one who died in Uhud, who you call Sayyid al-Shuhada? All Muslim schools accept he is Sayyid al-Shuhada for dying in Uhud. Rasulullah gave him this title. He says, is my uncle not Ja'far al-Tayyar, the one who flies in Jannah with 2 wings? Again, accepted by all schools. He then says, is it not about me and my brother that Rasulullah said, we are Sayyid Shababi Ahl al-Jannah? Think about this for a second. Muslims, people in general, what is their aim in life? To get towards Jannah, right? If we can get towards Jannah, we will be very happy. These individuals want to go to Jannah. He says, you want to go to Jannah. But you know Rasulullah said, I am Sayyid Shabab Ahl al-Jannah. I am the master of Jannah. These Muslims standing in front of Abi Abdullah tells them, I am the master of the paradise you want to go to. And yet you're killing me? And yet they did it. They carried it out. How do we describe these people? Spiritually dead doesn't even cut it. That's why Allah says, أُولَٰئِكَ كَالْأَنْعَامِ. They are like cattle. بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ. They are worse than animals. Animals still listen to their rulers. These people are blind. They are gone. They are finished. They are spiritually completely dead. After that, in that same sermon, Imam al-Hussein, he says, if you do not believe me, go and ask Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. Go and ask Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. Go and ask Sahel ibn Sa'ad al-Sa'idi. Go and ask Zayd ibn Arqam. Go and ask Malik ibn Anas. Go and ask these individuals. Anas ibn Malik. Go and ask these individuals. They heard all of these things from Rasulullah. You know I am telling the truth. Why are you killing me? But what was wrong with those people that they were that dead that they could kill the grandson of Rasulullah? You know, such that even later on in Sham, that Christian man who saw the head of Imam al-Hussein, he saw this beautiful head of Imam al-Hussein in Sham. And he said to these individuals, whose head is this? They said, this is the head of the grandson of the Prophet, Imam al-Hussein. He said, woe be to you. We have a remnant from the descendants of the companions of Jesus, and yet we sanctify it just because it is related to Jesus. You have the grandson of your Prophet and you beheaded him? Anybody with an iota of, decency would spare the life of the grandson of the Prophet. Yet these individuals standing in front of Imam al-Hussein, they're spiritually dead. They're completely gone. Then Imam al-Hussein carries on in that sermon on Ashura. He calls out the names of the individuals that sent him letters in Kufa. He says, did you not say to me that the time is ripe and the swords are sharp and my time to come is now? Did you not write letters to me and tell me that your swords are ready to defend me and that the time is perfect for me to come to Kufa? The people who wrote letters to him in Kufa, he's telling them, you wrote letters to me. Why are you standing against me? Did they differ? Did they defect? Did they leave? No. They stood against Imam al-Hussein. Spiritually dead individuals. Jism is alive, living life, praying, fasting, reciting Quran. But that spirit inside is dead. We have to be very careful. Because right after Allah talks about the kafirin, who does he speak about? The munafiqeen. ومن الناس من يقول آمنا بالله وباليوم الآخر وما هم بمؤمنين. From among men are those who say we believe in Allah and we believe in the day of judgment, but they don't believe. Then Allah later on he likens them to the disbelievers. How? In verse 18 he says صم بكم عمي, deaf, dumb and blind. فهم لا يرجعون. They will never turn back. The people of Kufa may not be called kafirin, but they were certainly munafiqeen. They were still deaf, dumb and blind. They still prayed, fasted, but they were blind inside. When we come to these majalis, we want to give life to this heart so that we make sure we are not like them. We make sure that the warith, the heir of Imam al-Hussein doesn't come tomorrow and we don't stand against him as well. And today, this is what I wanted to talk about now. How do we give life to that heart? How do we make sure that this heart does not die? How do we make sure that this heart does not start to rust away? If I have your permission, please recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In order to complete this discussion on the death of this heart, the spiritual heart, or what we sometimes call in the traditions qaswatul qalb, the hardness of the heart, allow me to present before you a beautiful passage of dua Abi Hamza al-Thumali of Imam al-Sajjad. Imam al-Sajjad, in this monumental dua, he has a beautiful passage which all of us can kind of, relate to. The Imam says, Allahumma kullama qad tahayyatu wa taqabbat. Oh Allah, whenever I prepare myself and become prepared, I ready myself. وَقُمْتُ لِلصَّلَاةِ بَيْنَ يَدَيْكَ وَنَاجَيْتُكَ. And I go to stand in prayer and to talk to you in private. أَلْقَيْتَ عَلِيَ نُعَاسٌ إِذَا أَنَا صَلَّيْتُ. A laziness comes over me every time I try to go and pray. مالي كلما قلت قد صلحت سريرتي وقرب من مجالس التوابين مجلسي. What is the matter with me, Ya Allah? Every time I think I have finally reformed myself and I finally become of the tawabin, عرضت لي بلية أزالت قدمي. Something comes upon me and makes me slip. وحالت بيني وبين خدمتك. And it stops me from coming to worship you, Ya Allah. That time we say, I'm going to pray Salatul Layl today. The alarm comes on, we see the alarm. We say 10 minutes, and an hour passes by. Every time we say to ourselves, I'll do that salah tomorrow, but that tomorrow never comes. I'll pray that, I'll give that zakat tomorrow, but that tomorrow never comes. The Imam then starts to give reasons. After saying to Allah, لَعَلَّكَ عَنْ بَابِكَ تَرَدْتَنِي. Oh Allah, it's as if you have turned me away from your door. Oh, عَنْ خِدْمَتِكَ نَحَّيْتَنِي. Or you've prohibited me from worshipping you. Then the Imam starts to give reasons. He says, أو لعلك رأيتني مستخفا بحقك فأقصيتني. Perhaps you have seen me diminishing your right, Ya Allah, so you have taken me away from you. We have diminished the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do we do this? This is when we don't pay attention to the rights of Allah in our life. The best way to analyze this is what Imam al-Sajjad himself said. Analyze your salat. The next time salat time comes, see what goes on inside you. See what your attitude is to salat. Does your psyche, does your inside say, let me go pray, it's salat time? Does your psyche say to you, does your mind say to you, you know what, it's time for salat. Unfortunately, I can't pray now, but I'll pray as soon as I get a chance. Or does the inside of you say, actually, I can't be bothered. I have to go do wudu, that's long. Football match is coming, I'll pray after football. I'll do it after this. If your attitude is, I'll pray later, that means that psyche is not with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's mustakhifan bihaqqillah. It's lowering the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you have a debt that is due and you have to pay it, if you haven't paid your khums or your zakat, if for example you have some salat you need to make up, some fast that you need to make up, and you're just putting it off and off, you're lowering the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your life. See your interaction with your daily wajibat. If they're not that important to you, but you try to fit it in. Many of us salat, we pray it. It's not that we don't pray it, but we fit it into our day when we get a chance and when we can be bothered. Then we are lowering the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the Imam carries on. Then he says, أَوْ لَعَلَّكَ فَقَدْتَنِي مِن مَجَالِسِ الْعُلَمَاءِ فَبَاعَدْتَنِي. Or maybe you didn't find me in the majalis of the ulama, so you made me go far away from you. أو لعلك رأيتني في مجالس البطالين فبيني وبينهم خليتني. Or maybe you found me in the majalis, in the sitting place of those who are vain, and so between me and them you made an interaction, you made a bond. What is the Imam saying here? The Imam is stressing to us something that we all know. Be very careful of your company in this life. Be very careful of the people you hang out with in this life. This is very important, not just for adults. This is more extremely important for our children. Be very careful which friends your children have. Be very cautious over which friends your children have. Because your children naturally become like the company that they keep. Even we as adults, when we keep the company of certain people, we become like them. If they speak rough, we will speak rough. They swear, we'll eventually swear. If they listen to music, even if we don't listen to music, music will become nothing normal to us. It won't bother us anymore. If they go and do something haram, we'll do that haram. If they don't give importance to prayer, we won't give importance to prayer. You become like the company that you keep. For our friends, this is vital. And here, even for the youngsters in this room who may not understand this, allow me to explain to you that Islamically you have friends and you have acquaintances. We're not saying that when you go to school you're not meant to be friendly with people. No. Be friends with everyone in school. But when we say friends in this context, we mean after school, who do you go to hang out with? Who do you go on dinner with? Who do you go to play football with? Those are the people who you become like. At school, be friends with everyone, be kind with everyone, enjoy with everyone. After school club, etc. But at night time, when you call someone and you say, let me come over to your house and let's play PlayStation together, that individual you have to make sure is a person of piety. That individual you have to make sure is a person who doesn't go with haram. And that's why I always say, try and make sure your friends are friends in the mosque. Because what better friendship than the friendship of wilayah? What better friendship than the friendship of wilayah, where you know your children are with other children that you know where they are, who their parents are, what sort of things they get up to. And you know one day they'll come back to the center. Yes, they might go out and go shisha and go this and go that, as long as they don't do haram, but they'll still attend majalis. They'll still come to the masjid. They'll still attend the mosque. And that is why we built this beautiful complex, right? That's why we've got all these plans to develop this place, so that our children can come here and find a safe space here, where they can build their friend circles here. Be very careful of the company you hang out with. If the company you hang out with are vain, your heart will start to die. The company you hang out with are not people of dhikr, are not people of Quran, are not people of wilayah. That heart will start to die away. So the Imam says, Ya Allah, maybe you didn't find me among the sitting place of the ulama. You didn't find me sitting with people of ilm, people of knowledge. Maybe you found me sitting too much with people of vain talking. Then the Imam says, Oh, لَعَلَّكَ بِجُرْمِي وَجَرِيرَتِي كَافَيْتَنِي. Or maybe because of my excessive sinning, you are now giving me the punishment for those sins. So you're not allowing me to worship you. Oh, لَعَلَّكَ بِقِلَّةِ حَيَاءِ عَنْكَ جَازَيْتَنِي. Or maybe now you are penalizing me for the fact that I have no shame before you, Ya Allah. These 2 points are vital. Persistence in sinning and the lack of shame before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, there's one thing to sin persistently, but one of the reasons we persistently sin is what? We lack shame before Allah. We don't have the shame of committing the sin anymore. We swear, we backbite, we do something haram and it doesn't bother us anymore. We forget we are sitting in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. We are standing before our Lord at all times. Inna Allah kana alaykum raqiba. Your Lord is watching over you at all times. The reason why we persist in sinning is because we've lacked shame. If you want to understand to yourself, why do we keep committing sins? Why can't I take the sin out of my life? Understand it's because you don't truly believe Allah is watching you. You don't respect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you respected Allah, would you commit those sins? This is where a man once came to Imam as-Sadiq salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. He says to the Imam, Oh Imam, I've tried very hard. I can't stop this sin of mine. The Imam says, you have one of 2 problems. The first problem you might have is that you're actually a kafir. You don't believe Allah is watching you. Or the second problem that you have, if you truly believe in Allah, is that you've made Allah a cheap observer. You've made Allah a cheap observer in your life. Allah is not somebody important to you. You know Allah is watching and you still commit the sins. These are one of the 2 problems you have. Either you don't believe in Allah, or Allah is just a cheap observer to you. Otherwise, if you believed Allah was truly watching you, in the same way when your parents watch you, you become more careful of what you do, correct? When an elder is watching you, become more careful. Yet Allah is watching you and you don't care. You carry on doing what you're doing. We lack shame. The Imam says when you lack shame, you persist in sinning. When you persist in sinning, that heart starts to die. This is why in the tafsirs of those verses of the Quran, such as Khatam Allahu ala qulubihim wa ala sam'ihim, the mufassirin in both Sunni and Shi'i tafasir, they mention a hadith. One comes from, that goes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Where he says that the heart, take it like a white piece of cloth. Whenever you commit a sin, a black dot comes onto this white piece of cloth. And he says the more you commit sins, the more you are blotching this white piece of cloth with black, until the entire heart starts to turn black. And the reverse is also true. Every time you do tawbah, every time you try to do an act of goodness, you put white back onto this piece of cloth. Our life is constantly trying to purify this heart. Which is why Allah in the Quran, Surah Al-Shams, He says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Successful is the one who purifies this soul. Polished is this soul. Make sure the soul remains pure. This is one of the reasons why our ulama, they say, when they comment on how did the Ahlul Bayt, how did they stay infallible? How did they protect themselves from sins? They say it is this point. They were so careful about that heart and whether any black dot came onto that heart, that before any black dot could touch it, they would do istighfar. That is why you see in the du'as of the Ahlul Bayt, they break down crying in forgiveness towards Allah. They've not performed sins, but the very idea of being close to those sins makes them break down in du'a. That is why I believe some people say that these du'as, the Ahlul Bayt did it for us. They recited all these things for us. I don't believe this. I believe the Ahlul Bayt genuinely did these du'as. Genuinely. I don't believe they were actors. I believe they genuinely did these du'as because of how careful they were about the purity of their own souls. Such that they were this is the reason why they were able to protect themselves from sins. Because they were so careful about letting any black spots come upon them. After this hadith, Rasulullah says, this is what Allah says in the Quran. بَلْ رَانَ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. Rather, the sins that they perform, what they have earned, has covered and rusted over their hearts. And this is where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, he says that the hearts gather rust like iron gathers rust. In order to remove this rust from the hearts, frequent the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the tilawat of the Quran. Frequent the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make sure you are always trying to remember Allah azza wa jal. Sometimes we see those people who hold tasbihs. And sometimes I feel like, especially with the modern generation, you're like, either it's showy or it's old school, it's old-fashioned. No, it's not old-fashioned. It's a good thing. Remember Allah frequently. You don't want to hold a tasbih, no problem. Do it with your hands. Never leave the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Never leave the remembrance of Allah. Because this is where, again, Imam al-Sajjad in Du'a bi Hamza, what does he say? He says, maybe, oh Allah, you saw me given an opportunity to worship you, but I turned away from you. So you turned away from me. You saw I was given an opportunity to worship you, an opportunity to serve. Sometimes our friends tell us, or somebody says, let's go to the mosque today, I'll give you a lift. And you're like, not today. I don't feel it today. I can't be bothered today. Somebody gives you the opportunity to volunteer in something. You're given the opportunity. There's a difference between you having to motivate yourself and somebody coming and offering you. You're given the opportunity, but you turn it down. With no exact reason, no real reason, just because you're bored. The Imam says when this happens, when you do this, then Allah turns away from you as well. Not literally, metaphorically. Allah never turns away from us. But if you turn away from Him, He allows you to go further into oblivion. Allah, when He says, خَتَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ, Allah doesn't set a seal on your hearts. You set the first seal, and because you choose to set that seal on your heart, Allah seals it off for you. Allah does what you choose. You chose to turn away from Him, He says, okay, go. You choose to turn back towards Him, He welcomes you with open arms. It's you that take the first step towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't give up these opportunities to do dhikr. And that's why one of the most beautiful ways we can give life to these hearts is by upholding these majalis of Ahlul Bayt. Because here, when we come to a place of majalis, we come to majalis al-ulama. We come to places where people of ilm are sitting. Not only that, one of the things that is a characteristic of the hard heart is that it cannot cry. But yet when we come to majalis, sometimes the heart that cannot cry breaks down in the majalis of Sayyid al-Shuhada. This is why when you go to the hadiths, when it talks about the tears for Sayyid al-Shuhada, there are grand rewards attached to it. Why? Imam al-Baqir says, the tear the size of a mosquito wing builds for you a palace in Jannah. How can a tear the size of a mosquito wing build for me a palace in Jannah? Because it takes only one small tear for Abi Abdullah to open up that heart. That heart is sometimes dead. That heart is sometimes, engulfed in the materialism of this world, engulfed in the rat race of this life. You come to majalis, one tear for Sayyid al-Shuhada, and you remember, you re-recognize the softness of that heart and your true purpose in life. Truly, this was the purpose of Sayyid al-Shuhada as well. In a day or two's time, we will recite ziyarat of Arba'een. What do we say in ziyarat al-Arba'een? We say, "Oh Abi Abdullah, you gave your life for what reason? لِيَسْتَنْقِذَ عِبَادِكَ مِنَ الْجَهَالَةِ وَحَيْرَةِ الضَّلَالَةِ." To save your servants from ignorance and from confusion. To give us clarity in life. To give us direction in life. And we remember Sayyid al-Shuhada, all of a sudden we remember life is more than all of these possessions. Life is more than all of these, this material possessions. Not that we shouldn't go after this life, but there's a balance. Sometimes we lose that balance. This attachment to the dunya kills the heart. And that is truly what killed some of the people that were against Abi Abdullah. You look at Umar ibn Sa'ad. Famously you hear Umar ibn Sa'ad, he was a friend of Abi Abdullah in young age. His father Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas was a companion. Whether he's good or bad, we can discuss another day. He was a companion. And Umar ibn Sa'ad was a contemporary of Abi Abdullah, a classmate you could say. Which is why when they were martyring Abi Abdullah, Zainab al-Kubra looked at him and said, "You are watching on while your friend is being martyred? While somebody you knew very closely was being martyred?" And Umar ibn Sa'ad just turned away. On the day of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein comes to Umar ibn Sa'ad and he says, "Oh Umar, I know you have hopes for Ray. You want that land. I promise you an even bigger land in Jannah." What does Umar say? He says, "I can see Ray, but I can't see your palace in Jannah." Remember, what did we start with? الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْ. They believe in the unseen. Umar ibn Sa'ad, he's a Muslim, doesn't believe in the unseen. Imam al-Hussein says, "I am Sayyid Shabab Ahl al-Jannah. I'll give you a palace in Jannah." He says, "Oh, but I can see that land of Ray. I can't see your palace." Engulfed in this world. Engulfed in the material possessions of this world. And that is why spiritually we can say there's a third death that allows us to revive our hearts. And that is the hadith, or the statement we can say is attributed to Rasulullah, but it seems to be from the spiritual ulama, which is where it is said, "Mutu qabla an tamutu." Die before you die. What death is this? Just now we said the death of the qalb, the death of the ruh. What does it mean when we say die before you die? This is referring to the death of the nafs, the subduing of that base self, that animalistic self, the death of that animalistic self. And this death is what would lead to what we call true taslim or true Islam. One of the biggest problems we as Muslims have is we look at Islam as a noun, not a verb. What do I mean? Islam literally means what? Submission to the will of Allah. It's a verb, not a noun. When we look at Islam as a noun. I follow Islam. I identify as Muslim. Islam is not a noun, it's a verb. It's something you practice. It's something that encapsulates your being. A Muslim is somebody who Islam encapsulates his entire being, such that he submits towards Allah. That submission only comes when you have killed that desire, when you have destroyed that nafs and you have subdued it to the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now it has desires, but it does not go excessive in its desires. It is controlled in its desires. Why? Because it submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again here, look at your relationship with your daily prayers. Remember those examples that I gave? Time of salah comes and you say, "I can't be bothered." Who can't be bothered? I can't be bothered. I'll pray later. I will pray when I feel like it. There are many people, they don't follow some of the injunctions of Islam because they don't understand them. Why is music haram? Why should I wear the hijab? Why should I do this? Even more in modern days, you actually see on some groups, some people say, "Why do we need to pray 5 times a day? I'll meditate and I'll pray and speak to God when I feel like it. I'll do it every day. Why do I have to pray?" Maybe this is an outdated practice. This is truly what you'll hear from some Muslims. This organized religion is just something you guys made up to try and bring people together. We don't need it today. I'll meditate and I'll speak to God. All of these things, I won't do it because it doesn't make sense to me. I'll do it when it makes sense, when I understand it. Here, the true God is not Allah. It is that I. It is that me. It is that self, that ego, that turns you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. True Islam is when you murder that self, that I, and tell it to submit only to what Allah wants. Then if my desire is halal, I will do it because Allah has allowed it. But as soon as my desire becomes excessive, I'll leave it because I submit towards Allah. And every time I'm faced before something of this dunya and the akhirah, and they are clashing with each other, I will take the akhirah. Because I know I wasn't created for this world. I was created for that world. The people on Ashura who were with Abi Abdullah, they were people like this. Submission. They had submitted to Abi Abdullah al-Hussein. They left everything. They left their whole lives behind to go to Abi Abdullah. They had given lives to their ruh and their heart. That is why in Ziyarat al-Warith, which we'll recite, what do we say? Salawatullahi alaykum wa ala arwahikum wa ala ajsadikum. Not just peace be upon you, no. Blessings upon you, upon your ruh and upon your bodies. Because they were ruh and bodies. They had given life to both. That's why we say, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bifanaik. And that is why when you give life to this ruh, this soul, Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا تَقُولُوا لَمَنْ يُقْتَلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتٍ. Do not say to the one who dies in the way of Allah is dead, بَلْ أَحْيَاء. He is still alive. Because he is already accustomed to that world. Therefore when his body dies, his soul is still alive. When you don't accustom yourself to that world, when you die, your soul doesn't know where it is. So your soul is not really alive, it's confused. And it only goes through a number of deaths, which is what we call punishment and hellfire. When Allah describes hellfire, what does He say? إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَوْفَ نُصْلِيهِمْ نَارًا. Those who disbelieve, they will taste the punishment. كُلَّمَا نَضِجَتْ جُلُودُهُمْ. Every time their skins will be burnt, بَدَّلْنَاهُمْ جُلُودًا خَيْرَهَا لِيَذُوقُوا الْعَذَابِ. We will give them new skins so that they can taste the punishment again. They will go through death. Eternity of death. Why? Because their ruh did not understand that world, so they can't take that world. So they will only go through punishment. But when you accustom yourself to that world from now, when you die, you don't die. No. لا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون. No, not only are they alive, they are gaining rizq from their Lord still after death. The true life is the life of the soul. And the battle in Ashura was between people who had given life to the soul and people whose soul was completely dead. And when we look at those souls who were completely dead, now we can maybe understand why they were so brutal. You know, Islamically, when we kill an individual in battle, in warfare, we still have some rules upon us. We are not allowed to defame, mutilate, dishonor the body because we have some form of honor. But you go to those people against Abi Abdullah al-Hussein and they are so dead that they have no decency left within them. You find many years later, Imam al-Sajjad will be walking past a butcher. He would say, "Oh butcher, can I ask you some questions?" The butcher says yes. He says, "Oh butcher, when you're about to slaughter this animal, did you give it some water?" The butcher says, "Ya ibn Rasulullah, your grandfather taught us that before we butcher an animal, we should give it some water." Imam al-Sajjad looks towards Karbala and says, "Oh my father Hussein, they killed you while you were thirsty." Imam al-Sajjad then says, "Oh butcher, can I ask you another question? Before you are slaughtering this animal, are you slaughtering it in front of its family members or away from its family members?" The butcher said, "Oh Ya ibn Rasulullah, your grandfather taught us that when we slaughter an animal, we should do it away from its family members. Because if we slaughter it in front of its family, it causes great grief to the family." Imam al-Sajjad looks towards Karbala and says, "Oh my father Hussein, they killed you while your family were watching on. Zainab al-Kubra was watching on from Aliasgar." Imam al-Sajjad then says, "Oh butcher, can I ask you another question? When you are killing this animal, are you using a sharp knife or a blunt knife?" The butcher says, "I'm using a sharp knife because your grandfather taught us when we use a sharp knife, that makes the death more quicker and easier for the animal." Imam al-Sajjad says, "Oh my father Hussein, they killed you you, but they used a blunt knife so that your death was slow and was difficult upon you. But as though it was not enough for them to kill Abi Abdullah and slaughter him, worse than they slaughter a sheep. After having beheaded his head and put it upon a spear, they did not leave the body there just to lie. No, they came and they looted the body of Imam al-Hussein. One man came and took the shirt, another man came and took his trouser, another man came to take his ring. When the ring would not come off the finger, he would cut the finger of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein and take his ring. As if that was not enough, he has already killed Abu Abdullah, mutilated his body, made his body barren. The call came out to the horses to trample the body of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein. The narration say the horses would run over the body of Abi Abdullah and his chest and his back would become crushed together on the plains of Karbala. As if that was not enough, they have brutally murdered Abi Abdullah al-Hussein, decimated his body. Now on Sham-e Khariba, they go towards the tents. They go towards women folk. In Arab culture, it was a source of shame to attack a woman. But these individuals were so dead, they would go towards the women. They would set fire to their tents while they are inside. What brutal man sets fire to a house when there's people inside the house? They set fire to a tent and the women start running out of the tents. The narrations say they begin to whip the woman. One narration says one of the daughters of Abdullah, Fatima bint al-Hussein, she was slapped so hard that she fell unconscious. She woke up in the lap of Kulthum and she said, "Oh my aunt, where are we? Why has our hijab been taken from our head?" Another narration comes and says they went towards Sakina and they went to take the earrings of Sakina. The narration says the man comes to Bibi Sakina and he's crying. Sakina says, "Oh man, why are you crying?" He says, "Because I feel sorry that I'm taking your earrings." Sakina says, "Then don't take my earrings." He says, "But someone else will take it." Look how heartless this man is. Then without any mercy, he drags the earrings from the ears of Bibi Sakina. Sakina begins to cry as the blood gushes from her ears and she says, "Oh man, had you asked me, I would have given you the earrings by myself." The narrations say they did not stop there. They would be slapping the woman, whipping the woman, snatching their hijab, as they chained them all to take them towards Kufa. Imam al-Baqir narrates that my father, he was sat upon a camel without any saddle. A camel with no saddle has a very difficult hump, so it digs into your back. Imam al-Sajjad sat on that camel, and then he says that my father told me that the gods were told that if any of us dared to cry, they should whip us. And the narrations say if any child even cried for a second, they would be whipped immediately. Look at the level of oppression on the family of Rasulullah. Not just that, when they were chained, they weren't chained individually. No, they were attached together in their chains. And when they were chained, they weren't chained in height order. So there would be some people who were tall, some people who were short. Then they were dragged along. Now if you're dragged, you have to keep up with the person who's dragging you. The narration says some of the children could not do this. And so they started to be dragged along the floor, such that they would die because of the heat on the floor of those lands. Zainab al-Kubra would try her best to fall down to stop them at times, yet some of the children would pass away in that sense. Ala la'natullahi ala al-qawmi al-zalimin. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون مات مع حسين يا حسين